Good morning, everyone. So today is April the 7th, 2021, or in Hebrew it's 25th of Nisan, 5781. I am at the Ugly Mug Cafe in Hendersonville today. It is located at 2024 Asheville Highway, and it's in the Vogel Plaza. That's Vogel. So if you're on Hendersonville Road, Hendersonville Road it's like a really weird road. So if you're going towards Asheville on Hendersonville Road, then it turns into Biltmore Avenue. If you're going to Hendersonville on Hendersonville Road, it turns into Asheville Highway. So it's all the same road. So it's not all that far really from where I was at yesterday at the PB&J's. This little coffee shop is very interesting. They only have like pastries and and bagels. They don't really have any actual meals like the coffee cup. I'm sorry, like Panera or PB&J's. However, they do have this really interesting drink. It's called a boba tea, Boba. The one I got is dragonfly and mango. So you have these little dots. These are pearls, and whenever you get them in your mouth, you bite into them, and they will burst into different flavors. And so, so they have the different flavors of pearls, and then they put in whatever flavor you want. They have like a regular green tea or regular black tea, or you could go with one of the milky teas, and I got the milky tea. So this is mango and dragon fruit or dragonfly, and it is really good. It's like a fruity flavor. So I really suggest that if you're in this area to come check them out. And their logo is the English Bulldog, which I even though I know that what they're trying to say is that that's an ugly mug, a lot of people do think that. But I like English Bulldogs. I hope to have one day. So we're going to start today in Leviticus chapter 11, and this starts the laws. Adonai said to Moshe and Aharon, "Tell the people of Israel, these are the living creatures which you may eat among all the land animals. Any that has a separate hoof which is completely divided and chews the cud, these animals you may eat. But you are not to eat those that only chew the cud or only have a separate hoof. For example, the camel, the coney, and the hare are unclean for you, because they chew the cud, but don't have a separate hoof. While the pig is unclean for you, because although it has a separate and completely divided hoof, it doesn't chew the cud. You are not to eat meat from these or touch their carcasses. They are unclean for you. Of all the things that live in the water, you may eat these. Anything in the water that has fins and scales, whether in seas or in rivers, these you may eat. But everything in the seas and rivers without both fins and scales, of all the small water creatures, and of all the living creatures in the water, is a detestable thing for you. Yes, these will be detestable for you. You are not to eat their meat, and you are to detest their carcasses. Whatever lacks fins and scales in the water is a detestable thing for you. The fallen creatures of the air are detestable for you. They are not to be eaten, but they are a detestable thing. The eagle, the vulture, the osprey, the kite, the various kinds of buzzards, the various kinds of ravens, the ostrich, the screech owl, the seagull, the various kinds of hawks, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the horned owl, the pelican, the barn owl, the stork, the various kinds of herons, the hoopoe, and the bat. All winged and swimming creatures that go on all fours are a detestable thing for you, except that all winged swimming creatures that go on all fours, you may eat those that have jointed legs above their feet, enabling them to jump off the ground. Specifically, of these you may eat the various kinds of locusts, grasshoppers, katydids, and crickets. But other than that, all winged swimming creatures having 4 feet are a detestable thing for you. The following will make you unclean. Whoever touches the carcass of them will be unclean until even, and whoever picks up any part of their carcass is to wash his clothes will be unclean until even. Every animal that has a separate but incompletely divided hoof, or that doesn't do the cut, is unclean for you. Anyone who touches them will become unclean. Whatever goes on its paws, among all animals that go on all fours, is unclean for you. Whoever touches its carcass will be unclean until even, and whoever picks up its carcass is to wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. These are unclean for you. The following are unclean for you among the small creatures that swarm on the ground: the weasel, the mouse, the various kinds of lizards, the gecko, the land crocodile, the skink, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. They are unclean, crawling creatures. Whoever touches them when they are dead will be unclean until evening. Anything on which one of them falls when dead will become unclean. Wooden utensil, article of clothing, lather, sacking, any utensil used for work. It must be put in water, and it will be unclean until evening. Then it will be clean. If one of them falls into a clay pot, whatever is in it will become unclean, and you are to break the pot. Any food permitted to be eaten that water from such a vessel gets on will become unclean, and any permitted liquid in such a vessel will become unclean. Everything on which any carcass part of theirs falls will become unclean, whether oven or stove. It is to be broken in pieces. They are unclean, and will be unclean for you. Although a spring or cistern for collecting water remains clean, but anyone who touches one of their carcasses will become unclean. If any carcass part of theirs falls on any kind of seed to be sown, it is clean. But if water is put on the seed and a carcass part of theirs falls on it, it is unclean for you. If an animal or a kind that you are permitted to eat dies, whoever touches its carcass will be unclean until evening. A person who eats meat from its carcass or carries its carcass is to wash his clothes. He will be unclean until evening. Any creature that swarms on the ground is a detestable thing. It is not to be eaten. Whatever moves on its stomach, goes on all fours, or has many legs, all creatures that swim on the ground, you are not to eat them, because they are a detestable thing. You are not to make yourselves detestable with any of these swarming, crawling creatures. Do not make yourselves unclean with them. Do not defile yourselves with them. For I am Adonai, your God. Therefore consecrate yourselves and be holy, for I am holy, and do not defile yourselves with any kind of swarming creature that moves along the ground. For I am Adonai, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Therefore you are to be holy, because I am holy. Such then is the law concerning animals, flying creatures, all living creatures that move about in the water, and all creatures that swim on the ground. Its purpose is to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, and between the creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. So if you'll notice that the animals that he says that we can't eat are the things that doctors and dietitians tell you that are good and healthy for you. And the things that he says not to eat are things that they tell you not to eat because they're unhealthy for you. Like we know that pork, pigs, they will raise your blood pressure. And they things like shrimp and lobster oysters and crabs and things like that, um, which I absolutely love, and it's very easy for me to give those things up because um, I don't eat them that often, and um, most of the people in my family don't like those things either. So, um, but I found out that those are bad for your cholesterol. So, but I heard Rabbi yesterday, Rabbi Mordecai Griffin, on the Aliyah Day. He's from Judaism, and he's a Messianic. Well, there's supposed to be a difference between Messianic Judaism and Lapid Judaism, but um, the Lapids believe in Jesus too, just like the Messianics do. So, but I call them all Messianic just for clarifying whether or not they believe in Jesus. So, but he was saying that this is not about health reasons, that it's about discipline. It was to teach you discipline. So, if you can, um, discipline yourself not to do the things that he says to not do, then, um, that's a growth for you. So, this was on his show yesterday on April the 6th. So, I really suggest that you watch his show as well. So, starting in chapter 12, Adonai said to Moshe, "Tell the people of Israel, if a woman conceives and gives birth to a boy, she will be unclean for 7 days, with the same uncleanness as in Nadav, when she is having her menstrual period. On the 8th day, the baby's foreskin is to be circumcised. She is to wait an additional 33 days to be purified from her blood. She is not to touch any holy thing or come into the sanctuary until the time of her purification is over. But if she gives birth to a girl, she will be unclean for 2 weeks, as in her Nadav, and she is to wait another 66 days to be purified from her blood. When the days of her purification are over, whether for a son or for a daughter, she is to bring a lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or dove for a sin offering, to the entrance of the tent of meeting, to the Kohen. He will offer it before Adonai, and make an atonement for her. Who will offer it before Adonai, and make atonement for her. Thus she will be purified from her discharge of blood. Such is the law for a woman who gives birth, whether to a boy or to a girl. If she can't afford a lamb, she is to take 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, the one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. The Kohen will make atonement for her, and she will be clean. Chapter 13. Adonai said to Moshe and Aharon, if someone develops on his skin a swelling, scab, or a bright spot which could develop a kidney disease, za'arat, that's leprosy, he is to be brought to Aharon the Kohen, or to one of his sons who are Kohanim. The Kohen is to examine the sore on his skin. If the hair in the sore has turned white, and the sore appears to go deep into the skin, it is za'arat. And after examining him, the Kohen is to declare him unclean. If the bright spot on his skin is white, but it does not appear to go deep into the skin, and his hair has not turned white, then the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 days. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine him again. And if the sore appears the same as before and has not spread on the skin, then the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 more days. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine him again. And if the sore has faded and hasn't spread on the skin, then the Kohen is to declare him clean. It is only a scab, so he is to wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spreads further on the skin after he has been examined by the Kohen and declared clean, he is to let himself be examined yet again by the Kohen. The Kohen will examine him, and if he sees that the scab has spread on his skin, then the Kohen will declare him unclean. It is Zaharat. If a person has Zaharat, he is to be brought to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine him, and if he sees that there is a white swelling in the skin, which has turned the hair white, and if he sees that there is a white swelling in the skin, which has turned the hair white. Let me start this over because I lost my place. So starting with verse 9. If a person has Zaharat, he is to be brought to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine him, and if he sees that there is a white swelling in the skin which has turned the hair white, and inflamed flesh in the swelling, then it is chronic Zaharat on his skin, and the Kohen is to declare him unclean. He is not to isolate him, because it is already clear that he is unclean. If the Zaharat breaks out all over the skin, so that, as far as the Kohen can see, the person with Zaharat has sores everywhere on his body, from his head to his feet, then the Kohen is to examine him. And if he sees that the Zaharat has covered his entire body, he is to pronounce the person with the sores clean. It is all turned white, and he is clean. But if one day inflamed flesh appears on him, he will be unclean. The Kohen will examine the inflamed flesh and declare him unclean. And if the inflamed flesh is unclean, it is Zaharat. However, if the inflamed flesh turns white, he is to come to the Kohen. The Kohen will examine him, and if he sees that the sores have turned white, then the Kohen is to declare clean the person with the sores. He is clean. If a person has on his skin a boil that heals in such a way that in place of the boil there is a white swelling or a reddish white bright spot, it is to be shown to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine it. If he sees that it appears to be more than skin deep and its hair has turned white, then the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. The disease of Zaharat has broken out in the boil. But the Kohen looks at it and doesn't see any white hairs in it, and it isn't more than skin deep, but appears faded. The Kohen is to isolate him for 7 days. If it spreads on the skin, this Kohen is to declare him unclean. It is a disease. But the bright spot stays where it was and has not spread. It is a scar of the boil, and the Kohen is to declare him clean. If someone has on his skin a burn caused by fire, and the inflamed flesh where it was burned has become a bright spot, reddish white or white, the Kohen is to examine it. And if he sees that the hair of the bright spot has turned white and that it appears to be deeper than the skin around it, it is Zaharat. It has broken out in the burn, and the Kohen is to declare him unclean. It is a sore from Zaharat. But if the Kohen examines it and sees no white hair in the bright spot, and it is no more than skin deep, but looks faded, then the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 days. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine him. If it is spread on the skin, then the Kohen is to declare him unclean. It is a sore from Zaharat. But if the bright spot stays where it was, and has not spread on the skin, but appears faded, it is a swelling due to the burn, and the Kohen is to declare him clean, because this is only a scar from the burn. If a man or woman has a sore on the head, or a man in his beard, then the Kohen is to examine the sore. If he sees that it appears to be deeper than the skin around it, with yellow, thin hair in it, then the Kohen is to declare him unclean. It is a crusted area, a Zaharat of the head or beard. If the Kohen examines the disease-crusted area and sees that it appears not to be deeper than the skin around it, and without any black hair in it, then the Kohen is to isolate for 7 days the person with the disease-crusted area. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine the sore, and if he sees that the crusted area hasn't spread, then it has no yellow hair in it, and that the crusted area is not deeper than the skin around it, then the person is to be shaved, except for the crusted area itself. And the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 more days. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine the crusted area. And if he sees that the crusted area has not spread on the skin and does not appear to be deeper than the skin around it, then the Cohen is to declare him clean. He is to wash his clothes and be clean. But if the crusted area spreads after his purification, then the Cohen is to examine him. And if he sees that the crusted area has spread on the skin, the Cohen is not to look for yellow hair. He is unclean. But if the crusted area's appearance doesn't change and black hair grows up in it, then the crusted area is healed. He is clean, and the Cohen is to declare him clean. If a man or woman has bright spots on his skin, bright white spots, then the Cohen is to examine them. If he sees that the bright spots on the skin are dull white, it is only a rash that has broken out on the skin. He is clean. If a man's hair is falling from his scalp, he is bald, but he is clean. If his hair is falling off the front part of his head, he is forehead bald, but he is clean. But if on the bald scalp or forehead there is a reddish white sore, it is zarat breaking out on his bald scalp or forehead. Then the Cohen is to examine him. If he sees that there is a reddish white swelling on his bald scalp or forehead, appearing like zarat on the rest of the body, he is a person of zarat. He is unclean. The Cohen must declare him unclean. The sore is on his head. Everyone who has zarat sores is to wear torn clothes and unbound hair, cover his upper lip, and cry, "Unclean! Unclean!" As long as he has sores, he will be unclean. Since he is unclean, he must live in isolation. He must live outside the camp. So I've not done any research on zarat or leprosy, but to me this sounds like it must be something that is very contagious if God doesn't want them living inside the camp. Well, they've got this, because if it's very contagious, everybody can get it. When zarat affects an article of clothing, whether it be a woolen or linen garment, on the threads or the woven in parts of either linen or wool, or on a hide or item made of leather, then if the stain on the garment, hide, threads, woven in parts, or item made of leather, or leather item, is greenish or reddish, it is an infection of zarat and is to be shown to the Cohen. The Cohen is to examine the stain and isolate the article that has the infection for 7 days. On the 7th day he is to examine the stain. If the stain is spread on the garment, threads, woven in parts, or leather, whatever its use, the infection is a contagious zarat. The garment is unclean. He is to burn the garment, threads, woven in parts of either wool or linen or item of leather having the infection, for it is a contagious zarat. It must be burned up completely. But if, when the Cohen examines it, he sees that the infection has not spread on the garment or on the threads, woven in parts, or leather item, then the Cohen is to order that the article having the infection be washed and isolated for 7 more days. The Cohen is to examine it after the stain has been washed, and if he sees that the stain has not changed color, then, even though that stain has not spread, it is unclean. You are to burn it up completely. It is rotten, no matter whether the spot is on the outside or on the inside. If the Cohen examines it and sees that the stain has faded after being washed, then he is to tear the stain out of the garment, threads, then he is to tear the stain out of the garment, or leather, threads, or woven in parts. If it appears again in the garment, threads, woven in parts, or leather item, it is contagious, and you are to burn up completely the article that had the stain. But if the infection is gone from the garment, threads, woven in parts, or leather item that you washed, then it is to be washed a second time, and it will be clean. This is the law concerning infections of zarat in a garment of wool or linen, or in the threads of the woven in parts, or in any leather item, when to declare it clean and when to declare it unclean. Now I know that these laws we think, well, why are they in there? Why do we they're so long and boring, and a lot of it doesn't even apply to us today. But you know, things are past. If God left it all up to just people's to oral passage, then words could get mixed up, and you don't really know who to believe and who not to believe. And if it's written down, it doesn't matter how many years later it is. When you come across something like this, then you know exactly what God's law said. So there's no mistaking of what you're supposed to do. Chapter 14. Adonai said to Moshe, "This is to be the law concerning the person afflicted with Zara on the day of his purification. He is to be brought to the Kohen, and the Kohen is to go outside the camp and examine him there. If he sees that the Zara sores have been healed in the afflicted person, then the Kohen will order that 2 living clean birds be taken for the one to be purified, along with cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop leaves. The Kohen is to order one of the birds slaughtered in a clay pot over running water. As for the live bird, he is to take it with the cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop, and dip them and the living bird in the blood of the bird slaughtered over running water, and sprinkle the person to be purified from the Zara 7 times. Next, he is to set the live bird free in an open field. He who is to be purified must wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe himself in water. Then he will be clean, and after that he may enter the camp, but he must live outside his tent for 7 days. On the 7th day he is to shave all the hair off his head, also his beard and eyebrows. He must shave off all his hair, and he is to wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and he will be clean. On the 8th day he is to take 2 male lambs without defect, 1 female lamb in its first year without defect, and 6½ quarts of fine flour for a grain offering, mixed with olive oil, and 2/3 of a pint of olive oil. The Kohen purifying him is to place the person being purified with these items before Adonai at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The Kohen is to take one of the male lambs and offer it as a guilt offering with the 2/3 pint of olive oil, then wave them as a wave offering before Adonai. He is to slaughter the male lamb at the place in the same sanctuary. He is to slaughter the male lamb at the place in the sanctuary for slaughtering sin offerings and burnt offerings, because the guilt offering belongs to the Kohen, just like the sin offering. It is especially holy. The Kohen is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the tip of the right ear of the person being purified, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Next, the Kohen is to take some of the 2/3 pint of olive oil and pour it into the palm of his own left hand. Dip his right finger into the oil that is in the left hand, and sprinkle from the oil with his finger 7 times before Adonai. Then the Kohen is to put some of the remaining oil in his hand on the tip of the right ear of the person being purified, on the thumb of his right hand, on the big toe of his right foot, and on the blood of the guilt offering. Finally, the Kohen is to put the rest of the oil in his hand on the head of the person being purified, and the Kohen will make atonement for him before Adonai. The Kohen is to offer the sin offering and make atonement for the person being purified because of his uncleanness. Afterwards, he is to slaughter the burnt offering. The Kohen is to offer the burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar. Thus, the Kohen will make atonement for him, and he will be clean. If he is poor, so that he can't afford to do otherwise, he is to take 1 male lamb as a guilt offering to be waved, to make atonement for him. 2 quarts of fine flour mixed with olive oil for a grain offering, 2/3 of a pint of olive oil, and 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, such as he can afford, the one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. On the 8th day he will bring them to the Kohen for his purification, to the entrance of the tent meeting before Adonai. The Kohen is to take the lamb with the guilt offering and the 2/3 of a pint of olive oil and wave them as a wave offering before Adonai. He is to slaughter the lamb with the guilt offering, and the Kohen is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the tip of the right ear of the person being purified, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The Kohen is to take some of the olive oil and pour it into the palm of his own left hand, and sprinkle with his right hand some of the oil that is in his left hand 7 times before Adonai. The Kohen is to put some of the oil in his hand on the tip of the right ear of the person being purified, on the thumb of his right hand, on the big toe of his right foot, in the same place as the blood offering, in the same place as the blood of the guilt offering. Finally, the Kohen is to put the rest of the oil in his hand on the head of the person being purified, to make atonement for him before Adonai. He is to offer one of the doves or young pigeons, such as the person can afford, whatever his means suffice for, the one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering, with the grain offering. Thus, the Kohen will make atonement before Adonai for the person being purified. Such is the law for the person who has Zaharah source, if he cannot afford the usual elements for his purification. Adonai said to Moshe and Aharon, "When you have entered the land of Canaan, which I am giving you as a possession, and I put an infectious Zaharah in a house in the land that you possess, then the owner of the house is to come and tell the Kohen, 'It seems to me that there may be an infection in the house.' The Kohen is to order the house empty before he goes in to inspect the infection, so that everything in the house won't be made unclean. Afterwards, the Kohen is to enter and inspect the house. He will examine the infection, and if he sees that the infection is in the walls of the house with greenish or reddish depressions that seem to go in deeper than the surface of the wall, he is to go out of the house to a store and seal up the house for 7 days. The Kohen will come again on the 7th day and examine the house. If he sees that the infection has spread over its walls, he is to order them to remove the infected stones and throw them into some unclean place outside the city. Next, he is to have the inside of the house thoroughly scraped, and the scraped off plaster is to be discarded outside the city in an unclean place. Finally, other stones must be set in the place of the first stones, and other plaster used to replaster the house. If the infection returns and breaks out in the house after the stones have been removed and the house scraped and plastered, then the Kohen is to enter and examine it. If he sees that the infection has spread in the house, it is a contagious Zaharah in the house, it is unclean. He must break down the house and take its stones, timber, and plaster out of the city to an unclean place. Moreover, whoever enters the house at any time while it is sealed up will be unclean until evening. Whoever lies down or eats in the house must wash his clothes. If the Kohen enters, examines, and sees that the infection has not spread in the house since it was plastered, then he is to declare the house clean, because the infection is cured. To purify the house, he is to take 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop leaves. He is to slaughter one of the birds in a clay pot over running water. He is to take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the scarlet yarn, and the live bird, and dip them in the blood of the slaughtered bird and in the running water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. He will purify the house with the blood of the bird, the running water, the live bird, the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the scarlet yarn. But he is to set the live bird free outside the city in an open field. Thus will he make atonement for the house, and it will be clean. Such is the law for all kinds of Zaharah sores, for crested area, for Zaharah in a garment, for a house, for a swelling, for a scab, and for a bright spot. Determine when it is clean and when it is unclean. This is the law concerning Zarat. Chapter 15. Adonai said to Moshe and Aharon, tell the people of Israel, when any man has a discharge from his body, the discharge is unclean. The discharge is unclean no matter whether it continues flowing or has stopped. It is still his uncleanness. Every bed which a person with a discharge lies on is unclean, and everything he sits on is unclean. Whoever touches his bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Whoever sits on anything the person with the discharge sat on is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Anyone who touches the body of the person with the discharge is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If the person with the discharge spits on someone who is clean, the latter is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Any saddle that the person with the discharge rides on will be unclean. Whoever touches anything that was under him will be unclean until evening. He who carries those things is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If the person with the discharge fails to rinse his hands in water before touching someone, that person is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If the person with the discharge touches a clay pot, it must be broken. If he touches a wooden utensil, it must be rinsed in water. When a person with a discharge has become free of it, he is to count 7 days for his purification. Then he is to wash his clothes and bathe his body in running water. After that, he will be clean. On the 8th day, he is to take for himself 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, come before Adonai to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and give them to the Cohen. The Cohen is to offer them, the one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. Thus the Cohen will make atonement for him on account of his discharge before Adonai. If a man has a seminal emission, he is to bathe his entire body in water. He will be unclean until evening. Any clothing or leather on which there is any semen is to be washed with water. He will be unclean until evening. If a man goes to bed with a woman and has sexual relations, both are to bathe themselves in water. They will be unclean until evening. If a woman has a discharge and the discharge from her body is blood, she will be in her state of niddah for 7 days. Whoever touches her will be unclean until evening. Everything she lies on or sits on in her state of niddah will be unclean. Whoever touches her bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything she sits on is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. As soon as he touches the bed or something she sat on, he will be unclean until evening. If a man goes to bed with her and her menstrual flow touches him, he will be unclean 7 days, and every bed he lies on will be unclean. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not during her period, or if her discharge lasts beyond the normal end of her period, then throughout the time she is having an unclean discharge, she will be as when she is in the niddah. She is unclean. Every bed she lies on at any time while she is having her discharge will be for her like the bed she uses during her time in the niddah. And everything she sits on will be unclean with uncleanness, like that of her time in the niddah. Whoever touches those things will be unclean. He is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If she has become free of her discharge, she is to count 7 days after that. She will be clean. On the 8th day, she is to take for herself 2 doves or 2 young pigeons and bring them to the Cohen at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The Cohen is to offer the one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. Thus the Cohen will make atonement for her before Adonai on account of her unclean discharge. In this way you will separate the people of Israel from their uncleanness, so that they will not die in a state of uncleanness before defiling my tabernacle, which is there with them. Such is the law for the person who has a discharge. For the man who has a similar image that makes him unclean. For the woman and a dog during her menstrual period. For the person, man or woman, for discharge. And for the man who has sexual relations with the woman who is unclean. Chapter 16. Adonai spoke with Moshe after the death of Aharon's two sons, when they tried to sacrifice before Adonai and died. Adonai said to Moshe, "Tell your brother Aharon not to come at just any time into the holy place beyond the curtain, in front of the ark cover which is on the ark, so that he will not die, because I appear in the cloud over the ark cover. Here is how Aharon is to enter the holy place, with a young bull as a sin offering and a ram as a burnt offering. He is to put on the holy linen tunic, have the linen shorts next to his bare flesh, have the linen sash wrapped around him, and be wearing the linen turban. They are the holy garments. He is to bathe his body in water and put them on. He is to take from the community of the people of Israel 2 male goats for a sin offering, and 1 ram for a burnt offering. Aharon is to present the bull for the sin offering, which is for himself, and make atonement for himself and his household. He is to take the 2 goats and place them before Adonai at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Then Aharon is to cast lots for the 2 goats, 1 lot for Adonai and the other for Azazel. Aharon is to present the goat whose lot fell to Adonai and offer it as a sin offering. But the goat whose lot fell to Azazel is to be presented alive to Adonai to be used for making atonement over it by sending it away into the desert for Azazel. Aharon is to present the bull of the sin offering for himself. He will make atonement for himself and his household. He is to slaughter the bull of the sin offering, which is for himself. He is to take a censer full of burning coals from the altar before Adonai, and, with his hands full of brown, fragrant incense, bring it inside the curtain. He is to put the incense on the fire before Adonai, so that the cloud from the incense will cover the ark cover, which is over the testimony, in order that he not die. He is to take some of the bull's blood and sprinkle it with his finger on the ark cover toward the east, and in front of the ark cover, he is to sprinkle some of the blood with his finger 7 times. Next, he is to slaughter the goat of the sin offering, which is for the people, bring his blood inside the curtain, and do with his blood as he did with the bull's blood, sprinkling it on the ark cover and in front of the ark cover. He will make atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of the people of Israel and because of their transgressions, all their sins. And he is to do the same for the tent of meeting, which is there with them right in the middle of their uncleanness. Right in the middle of their uncleannesses. No one is to be present in the tent of meeting from the time he enters the holy place to make atonement until the time he comes out. Having made atonement for himself, for his household, and for the entire community of Israel. Then he is to go out to the altar that is before Adonai and make atonement for it. He is to take some of the bull's blood and some of the goat's blood and put it on all the horns of the altar. He is to sprinkle some of the blood on it with his fingers 7 times, thus purifying it and setting it apart from the uncleannesses of the people of Israel. When he has finished atoning for the holy place, the tent of meeting and the altar, he is to present the live goat. Aharon is to lay both his hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the transgressions, crimes, and sins of the people of Israel. He is to put them on the head of the goat and then send it away into the desert with a man appointed for the purpose. The goat will bear all the transgressions away to some isolated place, and he is to let the goat go in the desert. Aharon is to go back into the tent of meeting, where he is to remove the linen garments he put on when he entered the holy place, and he is to leave them there. Then he is to bathe his body in water in the holy place, put on his other clothes, come out and offer his burnt offering and the burnt offering of the people, thus making atonement for himself and for the people. He is to make the fat of the sin offering go up in smoke on the altar. The man who let go the goat for Azazel is to wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. Afterwards he may return to the camp. The bull for the sin offering and the goat for the sin offering, which blood was brought in to make atonement in the holy place, is to be carried outside the camp. There they are to burn up completely their hides, meat and dye. The person burning them is to wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. Afterwards he may return to the camp. It is to be a permanent regulation for you that on the 10th day of the 7th month you are to deny yourselves and not do any kind of work, with the citizen and the foreigner living with you. For on this day atonement will be made for you to purify you. You'll be clean before Adonai from all your sins. It is a Shabbat of complete rest for you, and you are to deny yourselves. So just a little side note about the 10th day of the 7th month. That is when, that's what the Hebrews call, the Jewish people call Yom Kippur. So the 7th month is the month of Tishrei, which before they left Israel, that was considered the first day of the year. Tishrei was the first month of the year. So then the first day of Tishrei is the celebration of Rosh Hashanah, which is celebration of when Adam and Eve were created. And so Yom Kippur is when it's where you're actually the day of repentance. So what you do is you stop and you think about what you've done wrong in the year. And of course, we always go to God and ask forgiveness for our sins. But this is when you take a really deep thought about maybe there was something that you didn't realize was wrong, and and you stop and think about was there something that I've missed that I didn't know was wrong? God, please show it to me. But this back then they had to go have all these sacrifices to get forgiveness, and of course we don't have to offer up animals anymore. But that is that's what it's talking about here. And you could actually go on Hubbard.org or Jewish Learning. There's a Jewish encyclopedia online as well, and they'll give you more information about these. And also, that Rabbi Mordecai Griffin of the Pre-Judaism on his All Yahweh Days, he goes through all this stuff as well. So just check him out. He gives a lot more deeper insight because he's been into this longer than what I have. So he can give you better and more accurate information than I can at this moment. But going on, starting, let's see. This is a permanent regulation. Verse 32. The Cohen anointed and consecrated to be Cohen in his father's place will make the atonement. He will put on the linen garments, the holy garments. He will make atonement for the especially holy place. He will make atonement for the tent of meeting and the altar, and he will make atonement for the Kohanim and for all the people of the community. This is a permanent regulation for you, to make atonement for the people of Israel because of all their sins once a year. Moshe did as Adonai had ordered him. Chapter 17. Adonai said to Moshe, Speak to Aharon and his sons and to all the people of Israel. Tell them that this is what Adonai has ordered. When someone from the community of Israel slaughters an ox, lamb, or goat inside or outside the camp, without bringing it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to present it as an offering to Adonai before the tabernacle of Adonai, he is to be charged with blood. He has shed blood, and that person is to be cut off from his people. The reason for this is so that the people of Israel will bring their sacrifices that they sacrifice out in the field, so that they will bring them to Adonai, to the entrance of the tent meeting, to the Cohen, and sacrifice them as peace offerings. The Cohen will splash the blood against the altar of Adonai at the entrance to the tent of meeting, and make the fat go up in smoke as a pleasing aroma for Adonai. No longer will they offer sacrifices to the goat demons before whom they prostitute themselves. This is a permanent regulation for them through all their generations. And I was just listening to his name's slipped my mind now, Robin D. Bullock on his 11th hour yesterday, and he was talking about the word pandemic, and he broke down pandemic, broke down the word pandemic, and was talking about that God is Pan, and that he is part goat. So I wonder if these goat demons are uh, the God Pan that he's. Also tell them, when someone from the community of Israel or one of the foreigners living with you offers a burnt offering or sacrifice without bringing it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to sacrifice it to Adonai, that person is to be cut off from his people. When someone from the community of Israel or one of the foreigners living with you eats any kind of blood, I will set myself against that person who eats blood and cut him off from his people. For the life of a creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for yourselves. For it is the blood that makes atonement because of the life. This is why I told the people of Israel, none of you is to eat blood, nor is any foreigner living with you to eat blood. When someone from the community of Israel or one of the foreigners living with you hunts and catches game, whether animal or bird that may be eaten, he is to pour out its blood and cover it with earth. For the life of every creature, its blood is its life. Therefore I said to the people of Israel, you are not to eat the blood of any creature, because the life of every creature is its blood. Whoever eats it will be cut off. And so we know that when you're eating food that's not been fully cooked, you're still eating blood, because there's still some blood in there. And we've learned from you just listen to the news and you hear about people getting these sicknesses from like E. coli, and it comes from eating uncooked meat. So that's another reason why we shouldn't, eat blood at all, because you can get diseases from that. Anyone eating an animal that dies naturally or is torn to death by wild animals, whether he is a citizen or a foreigner, is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Then he will be clean. But if he doesn't wash them or bathe his body, he will bear the consequences of his wrongdoing. Chapter 18. Adonai said to Moshe, speak to the people of Israel. Tell them, I am Adonai your God. You are not to engage in the activities found in the land of Egypt, where you used to live, and you are not to engage in the activities found in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you, nor are you to live by their laws. You are to obey my rulings and laws and live accordingly. I am Adonai your God. You are to observe my laws and rulings. If a person does them, he will have life through them. I am Adonai. None of you is to approach anyone who is a close relative in order to have sexual relations. I am Adonai. You are not to have sexual relations with your father, and you are not to have sexual relations with your mother. She is your mother. Do not have sexual relations with her. You are not to have sexual relations with your brother's wife. That is your father's prerogative. You are not to have sexual relations with your sister, the daughter of your father or the daughter of your mother, whether born at home or elsewhere. Do not have sexual relations with them. You are not to have sexual relations with your son's daughter or with your daughter's daughter. Do not have sexual relations with them, because their sexual disgrace will be your own. You are not to have sexual relations with your father's wife's daughter, born to your father, because she is your sister. Do not have sexual relations with her. You are not to have sexual relations with your father's sister, because she is your father's close relative. You are not to have sexual relations with your mother's sister, because she is your mother's close relative. You are not to disgrace your father's brother by having sexual relations with his wife, because she is your aunt. You are not to have sexual relations with your daughter-in-law, because she is your son's wife. Do not have sexual relations with her. You are not to have sexual relations with your brother's wife, because this is your brother's prerogative. You are not to have sexual relations with the woman and her daughter, nor are you to have sexual relations with her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter. They are close relatives of hers, and it would be shameful. You are not to take a woman to be a rival with her sister and have sexual relations with her while her sister is still alive. You are not to approach a woman in order to have sexual relations with her when she is unclean from her time of nidab. You are not to go to bed with your neighbor's wife and thus become unclean with her. You are not to let any of your children be sacrificed to Molech, thereby profaning the name of your God. I am Adonai. You are not to go to bed with the man as with the woman. It is an abomination. Now, there's a lot of people out there who claim to be Christian and say that, and even pastors that say that, homosexuality is okay. It says it right here, chapter 18, verse 22. And it'll say it again really soon. So it's, it is not. They have obviously not been reading their Bible. This is why you should go through, and even though these things are long and boring and you think they don't apply, all of it's doesn't apply to us today, but there's still a lot that does. And you can go right back to his word and see, you can't miss it if you actually read your Bible. There's a lot of people that can't read it, that can't read, or they're so busy in their lives they really want to. So that's another reason why I'm doing this. Is for those that can't read, or maybe they're blind, they can, you can listen to this video and you can hear the words. Now, verse 23, you are not to have sexual relations with any kind of animal and thus become unclean with it, nor is any woman to present herself to an animal to have sexual relations with it. It is perversion. Do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things, because all the nations which I am expelling ahead of you are defiled with them. The land has become unclean, and this is why I am punishing it. The land itself will vomit out its inhabitants. But you are to keep my laws and rulings and not engage in any of these disgusting practices, neither the citizen nor the foreigner living with you. For the people of the land have committed all these abominations, and the land is now defiled. If you make the land unclean, it will vomit you out too, just as it is vomiting out the nation that was there before you. For those who engage in any of these disgusting practices, whoever they may be, will be cut off from the people. So keep my charge not to follow any of these abominable customs that others before you have followed, and thus defile yourselves by doing them. I am Adonai, your God. So this is all for this video, and we'll pick up in the next one in chapter 19. And so I just ask that you just hit the like and subscribe button and the notification bell, so that you'll be notified of every new video that I post. Thank you, and have a wonderful, blessed day. Bye-bye.